early childhood development. Each week we talk about a different stage of children development and what children need. And now, here comes your host.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Taryn, and you are listening to The Parenting. My guest today is Amber, and I discovered her when I was doing my classes at the University of TikTok. And she was talking about boredom and why it's so important to have a child be bored. And I've been preaching this for years that kids need to learn to just be bored. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I really have to have Amber on the podcast. And she so graciously agreed. So welcome, Amber.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's so good to have you here. So before we get into the chat about boredom, can you tell our listeners who you are and what you do?
Yes. Well, my name is Amber Cimiotti, and I'm a full-time stay-at-home mom. I'm 37 years old. I was not always a stay-at-home mom. I worked a full career up until about the age of 32 when I had my first baby. I now have two, and since then, I've been a stay-at-home mom. And becoming a mom, whether you're a stay-at-home mom or a working mom in today's world, there's no book on how to be a parent. Maybe if you have some really good parents or family structure around you that taught you these things, but for so many of us, we just are kind of thrown into it, especially if you've been maybe doing your career thing and just not really focused on that family life at all. So I really found myself just in this position that I wanted to excel at because everybody wants to be a great mom and everybody wants to give their children the best, experience in life and knowledge and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was really struggling and just, exhausted, didn't really have a big support system. Everything I was sort of taking in as far as content from social media, but also books and all sorts of things. None of it was really helping me. And I just found myself kind of like working harder, feeling more tired. I was grumpy, my kids were grumpy. Like it just didn't um seem to be working for me. And I knew I needed a change. So motherhood, parenting, the joy of parenting, kind of like really loving being a parent became a passion of mine. I just became
Mm-hmm.
very um I just became a seeker. I wanted to find a pathway that because it felt very unnatural, a lot of the things I was doing and that my kids were doing. And I just wanted to find a pathway that felt good because I knew that, parenting, we all know that it's not easy, but it's also very natural. So it should be natural. And I wanted to find that pathway. So I became passionate and I started talking about it on social media and I started doing more research into hunter gatherers and into other cultures and how different cultures or even ancient cultures raise their kids. And so I ended up here where I'm a full-time stay-at-home mom, but kind of like a part-time passion project. I talk a lot about parenting and all of it to just hopefully make lives better for moms and kids, truly. Like life easier for the moms hopefully and more natural, and for the kids just more in tune with what I think a children's life should be.
Should be.
So that's where I am today. Yeah.
I think we definitely have that in common that we just want to make parenting a manageable thing for parents, something that they, like you said, some parents parent because that's what they have to do, that's their legal obligation, but just to be able to come to enjoy being with their children, enjoy spending time, enjoy just being present and in the moment. And that has a lot to do with boredom because we live in an overstimulated society, right? Where parents also struggle to just be present. There's always a screen involved, or there's a phone. Like if you're not scrolling or if you're not watching TV, you're on the phone with somebody. Like there's always that stimulation and input. And I think that kind of is part of the problem. So just having this conversation for me is so important just to bring that awareness to parents that sometimes stillness and the quiet and just being is so important. And it's so important for development as well. So can we talk about boredom in children and instant gratification, like this, I call it this microwave generation that we live in, where everybody wants instant, they want what they want and they want it now, instead of like baking where you put stuff in the oven and you've got to wait for, you know, it to happen. So how does that affect kiddos, especially like with this instant gratification and them not knowing how to be bored? I mean, I don't know how else to say being bored, you know.
Exactly.
It's a verb,
Yeah.
like you have to be bored.
I think you make a really good point when you talk about adults having the same issue because um, sometimes I think it's easier for parents to realize, even us adults need to take a break. We need to
Hmm.
pause, and we're not in today's world unless you're doing like a 10-minute meditation or really like taking your headphones off and going for a walk. You're not pausing. So we also aren't pausing, and we also feel that stress.
Right.
I would say most Americans that you speak to feel like they're rushing from thing to thing, never have enough time to do what they want. They certainly don't have time to just sit and ponder, the stars or something like that. Everybody's overwhelmed. And so if us adults are struggling with that, and most adults today are burnt out, stressed out, um, being bored and staring at a wall sometimes for adults sounds like a luxury. They're like, I
Hmm.
wish I had time to do that. So if that's a struggle for our developed brains, how must it be for these underdeveloped little children's brains? Um, and I think people don't like the idea of getting maybe bored because they feel like it's has like a negative connotation to it. But as you said, it really is just allowing space, first off, that everybody, whether you're young or old, we just need some space. You need space to breathe. You need a moment to not have content and information and stimulation to come in so that kind of everything can settle. You can reach some calm. You can connect to who you are as a person.
Hmm.
Little kids need to do that. And that's like uh, first and foremost. So when there's constant stimulation, it just never even allows for that opportunity to come in. And you can take it from like, okay, they need to take a break, they need a breath, but that's just step one. When you get rid of that stimulation that's sort of addicting, because even us adults know that it's addicting,
Hmm.
you have step one, which is the breath, the space, the moment for it all to settle. But then the next steps are things like creativity, like learning, observing. One thing, a major thing that I find in parenting is awareness. You know, it's so important if you want children and adults to be aware of your surroundings, aware of their impact on the surroundings. Um, that's where they learn so much. They learn what the world is like, how the world feels, how people act at a restaurant, what their mom's doing in the kitchen. You hear those stories. For example, um, my husband's from Italy, so I talk about Italy a lot too, and
Hmm.
and I have family in Italy. But for example, you hear that classic story of um, the child that learns to cook because their grandma was always in the kitchen cooking, and the child was just around it, underneath the table when Nona's making pasta. These types of things, if your head is in an iPad or whatever, those types of things don't even have the opportunity to happen. Um, so when there's constant stimulation, constant instant gratification, it just stops so many healthy things from taking place for little kids. But step one is just breaking kind of that inflow of addictive material.
Right. I noticed, like, even with me, like, just being able to sit and be bored because I've lived alone for so many years. Like, my phone was my communication, right? And so I did become, at one point, addicted to the phone. And I used to just like wake up and reach for the phone. That's the first thing that I would do. And now I've got that morning routine where I do the meditation and I just sit in the quiet, and then sometimes driving home from work or whatever, I'll just be in silence just for that silent thing. But then even in that, it's not boredom because I'm driving. So it's not just that quiet thing. But I love what you said about the hunter-gatherers and how humans are actually designed to be bored. Can you get into that with us?
Yes, well, and I actually do this anytime something feels unnatural in parenting. I will apply it to hunter-gatherers, a lot of hunter-gatherers, but you can apply it to lots of different cultures and see if it
Mm-hmm.
makes sense and see if it would fit into what they do. And if it doesn't, then I think it's worth questioning. For hunter-gatherers, which is over like 95% or more of our human history. So it's really built into our DNA. Whether or not today we want to be hunter-gatherers, probably not. We like some of the luxuries we have. We can't deny that our evolution is like 95% or more that. So that's just what we're
Mm-hmm.
used to. That's what our psychology is used to. And they would spend periods of time hunting and gathering. So they would go out on hunting trips. There's obviously different ways that they would do that depending on the tribe. But if they went fishing or bow hunting or, whatever it is, that period, of course, was, I guess, they were busy doing that. Or if they were moving campsites because of they're following the food, those are busy moments. But then everything else is spent really just spending time in their camp, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's sitting around a fire. They would spend a lot of time or no fire, just sitting around, telling stories, doing nothing, what we would consider a luxury to be able to just sit around and have a cup of coffee for hours or something with a friend. That would be a very rare occasion for us. They did that all the time, every day.
Yeah.
They weren't in a rush. There wasn't a rush,
And
there was nowhere to
connection
go.
was so much better then, right? Connection was authentic and people were present. Like the relationships probably were a lot better then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that because of that, think about at nighttime, there wasn't electricity. So they just had a fire and then there was no
Mm-hmm.
lights. There wasn't things to do. You weren't running errands at night. You weren't, going out and about. There was nighttime and people either sat around a fire or talked in the dark or went to bed and laid down, and then you woke up again in the morning. So there's just certain things that we don't even think of, like the introduction of electricity that allows us to be so much more active, whereas they just didn't have that. So they
Mm-hmm.
also weren't trying to. We live in a much different world because for them they would hunt what they needed to eat and that's it. They weren't trying to expend many calories. They wanted to eat the right amount, because the more you expend calories, the more you run around, the more you have to eat more. That means you'd have to hunt
Yeah.
more. So for
Yeah.
them, it was really balanced. They didn't do too much, because if you do too much, you need to eat a lot more and therefore hunt a lot more and things become harder. So you do what you need for life. You eat what you need for life. And then the rest of the time outside of hunting and moving is just sitting there, like you said, connecting. They probably, all the different hunter gatherers probably did a number of different things, but much of it was sitting and spending time together, not doing
Mm-hmm.
much.
That's quite amazing. And then just to see also how we've evolved and how that's kind of been pushed to the wayside. And like you're saying, it's unnatural. And I think that's why relationships struggle because there's no time made for connection. But I mean, that could be a whole nother podcast on its own, right?
It's true. It's true. Yes.
So, what would you say are some of the benefits of being bored for littles? How does it like develop and help brain development?
There's a lot of benefits. The first benefit, kind of the things that I mentioned earlier, the fact that you just allowing their brain to rest, allowing their body to rest, allowing them to have these moments to connect to themselves. Um, Nowadays we set aside time to meditate, but I believe that in a normal life without all the stimulation, there was bits and pieces of meditation naturally built into life, you know,
Hmm.
um, where you're having these moments of peace, whether it's the other thing hunter gatherers did was spent a lot of time outdoors. And we all know if you spend time outdoors, you feel a bit peaceful, especially if you're looking at beautiful
Absolutely.
things like the beach or the mountains or so if you go outside, these periods where the many cultures wouldn't call it meditating, but they're just sitting outside, peaceful, And it does turn into sort of a meditation, because it's calm. There's no real activity going. It's like maybe a sense of boredom. So you fit
Mm-hmm.
in these really helpful things inside of boredom. And like I said, and then from that boredom, once a child or anybody gets bored enough, maybe they'll have an idea, or a stream of thought will come that wouldn't have normally come if it was being flooded with information that allows you to be creative or have nice thoughts about your family, or a thought of gratitude or whatever it is. It allows for those types of things. But it practically, for parents today, it really allows you to have calmer kids when you
Yeah.
practice this. And it also allows you to have um, more freedom as a family, and freedom as a mother, as a parent, depending on what you're, everybody has kind of different roles. So practically it helps, because when you practice this boredom, when you allow the kids to get bored, they feel comfortable in these situations. They don't panic. They don't reach for a prop or an iPad or even crayons or anything. They just know that they're bored. It's not going to be forever. It's okay. And I find that the children are much calmer, which is just a benefit to a calmer household. It's a benefit to running
Mm-hmm.
errands outside. It's a benefit to going to restaurants with your kid. Like whatever the situation is, it's nice to have kids that are comfortable in boredom, because they'll just ultimately be calmer. Of course, if you're doing a transition, it's not going to be calm right away. If you've never had them sit in boredom, they're not immediately
Mm-hmm.
going to be calm. You have to practice at it. But once you get there, it's very beneficial for that sort of calm, which then also allows the families to do more, because if a mom knows, or mom and dad know that their children can handle situations like long travel periods, or sitting, at a train station while we're waiting for the train, or going to a restaurant that we don't know how long it's going to be. Maybe it's going to be a 2-hour meal, you don't have to worry about those situations, because you
Mm-hmm.
know that your children are used to being bored.
Right.
And then from there, a lot of really special things can grow for the families, because then they get to do more family stuff together. They get to spend more time together, and etc. So being bored is sort of like the beginning of so many positive things that can happen.
What essential skills could be developed when a child is bored?
Everything. Like I really think almost everything in life when a child is bored, because um, one, they kind of have this confidence in themselves, because they know that they don't need a prop or a toy or a TV to feel comfortable. So it's just sort of a confidence in themselves. But like I said before, when you allow them to get bored, you have these moments of peacefulness, that then usually lead to things, like I said, awareness or observing. Um, so it could be that through boredom, they end up watching what their mom is doing. And whatever the mom's doing, I mean, I don't know, the mom could be knitting something on the couch, the dad could be putting together a desk, whatever the family's sort of doing, they're taking in that knowledge after this period of boredom, when they're free to kind of not be entertained and just sitting there. They're able to observe the things around them. Um, but then I said too, after boredom, a period of boredom, when they figure out what they want to do, they do things like they do kid stuff. Like yesterday, we were outside and my kids didn't have any toys or anything. They're just like in the backyard. And next thing you know, they're like climbing and dancing and, kind of doing these typical kid things that help them learn how to move, help them learn how to balance. They just sort of learn how to be with their bodies, and yeah, so there's just so many things that can be learned about life, especially when the kids are young, that are so important.
Okay, so earlier you were saying that boredom leads to having a calmer kid and it leads to a calmer home, and there's just all these like ripple effect benefits, right?
Hmm.
And then you said it's not just going to happen, you have to practice it. So, what are some ways that you can help parents introduce boredom? Like, say, a child is used to having a screen all the time or used to just being stimulated all the time. They show that they are bored or they say that they are bored. what are some ways parents can start introducing boredom to their kids?
Yeah, I think that if you are, there's so many different levels to this, but if you go to the extreme of maybe a child that's always on the iPad and that's always the go-to, that I think that just taking away the iPad and kind of going cold turkey and figuring out as a parent, like it'll be okay. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it might be a period of a couple days or maybe a couple weeks that the child struggles with it, because those can be a major crutch and they might feel very uncomfortable in those situations, but it'll be okay. And in those immediate things, I like to use stuff that's just around the house. So instead of just having them be like, hey, just sit there and figure it out, I usually have them come join me and help me do something around the house. Come help me cook. Is it them
Mm-hmm.
sitting there bored? No, but it's an activity that is a natural activity that doesn't have stimulation. And a lot of times I would just throw out offers for them to help me, whether it was help me cook, help me clean, help me, hey, I got to go run and do this. And what I find happens with kids a lot, is little kids, is that they're interested in helping you for a period of time. And then sometimes they'll
Absolutely.
get sometimes after a while, maybe they're like, okay, I'm done helping you. And then those are the moments where then they kind of go off and do their own thing
Mm-hmm.
randomly. And that could be anything. Like they could get sidetracked by another family member coming in the house. They could get sidetracked because they see one of their toys. Um, but I think just like allowing them to be in the natural habitat of your home, or if it's out in public that you normally do this, just allowing them to be aware of what's happening in public. And you can, like I said, facilitate it, by whether it's having them help you with something or in public talking. Sometimes I would talk about what's happening, like, oh, did you see this? The waiter brought by that big ice cream sundae. Did you notice that? That was so cool. And just kind of get them involved in the surroundings. Um,
Mm.
and then ultimately, the more and more you do these things, and then they get engrossed in maybe playing their own toys that they find, or if they have pencils around or whatever, the more and more you do this just on a daily basis regularly, the less they need any prompting to, oh, why don't you go do this? Why don't you help me do this? They don't really need that prompting. They'll feel comfortable doing it on their own. And depending on the situation, this could take maybe a month, or maybe it takes longer. But I think it's just important to try each day to have them use something that's in the natural environment of the house, until they're kind of off and running on their own. Like my kids now can just, and they'll go through peaks and valleys. Like
Yeah.
today is a good example because my daughter was sick. Um and so she isn't like debilitating sick, but not well enough to go to school. So it's kind of like she feels good, but she can't go to school. So I had them basically doing their own thing for like all day because I didn't want to
Mm.
turn on the TV. And so they would have periods where they wanted a suggestion from me, like, what should we do? And I'm like, well, we can put out the paint, or, you can help me. I got to do this. And then there would be like long periods where they wouldn't ask me anything and they'd be off doing
Mm.
whatever they were doing, and it would kind of just go like that throughout the day, which is already a win, because they're not on any devices. They're kind of being creative all on their own. And I will say, like a day like today, they slept great. They both took long naps on their own, because a
Mm-hmm.
day of doing that is like a good day for them. It's a good day of using their brains and playing, and it tuckered them out.
You kind of went into my next question, which was what are some cues you could give children that say that, well, cues you can give to a parent when the child says that they're bored? Because I find a lot of the time a child will say, I'm bored. And then the parent will say, why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? Which kind of gives them the solution. When, to me, at least, part of being bored is being able to problem solve. It's being able to think, like, critical thinking skills, where you
Yeah.
can where they can kind of figure out what they can be doing. But you kind of answered it by saying, when you're introducing boredom, to give them those suggestions. Oh, why don't you do this? Or why don't you do that? And then eventually they start figuring out that, oh, I can do this and I should do this, and maybe I can try this, or maybe I can, ask mom to help me with that, or whatever the case is. But I
Exactly.
do have to ask you, how do you balance making a child play independently and be bored without them feeling ignored or neglected?
Yes. I think this probably varies on, the mom, like whether they're some working moms, some stay-at-home moms. I know that there's variation. For instance, I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I am with my kids all the time. My husband works constantly. And then one of my best friends is a working mom. She has works a lot. She has a really kind of high demand job. And so, for example, when she sees her son at night, she likes to do an activity with him together
Mm-hmm.
because it makes them feel connected. Like she doesn't necessarily want him to sit in boredom because she's like, I only get an hour with you, I want
Right.
to do something with you. So I do think that it varies based on the mother situation. Whereas like for me, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm with my kids all the time, constantly. So I get opportunities throughout the day to just spend so much time with them that they definitely, I know confidently they don't feel neglected.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I would say is for example, and this is the way it's always been for the 5 years that I've been a mom, whenever I push boredom, I'm always in the room with them. A lot of the house layouts that we have these days is like where the kitchen can see the living room, and a lot of people have these kind of open layouts. Even if like when I lived in a small apartment, we still had that. So I I always lean on the word togetherness,
Mm-hmm.
togetherness. And I got that from the book Hunt, Gather, Parent. They talked a lot about just being together. And I just really lean into that because I think that's really lovely, the idea of the family doing so much together. I also had to lean into that, and probably a lot of moms can relate. If you don't have family support, if you don't have
Yeah.
babysitters, if you kind of don't have a choice but to be together all the time. So I wanted to find out a way to be together, but have it be really nice, not overwhelming, which it
Mm-hmm.
can be for a lot of moms, especially the way we're set up culturally. So with all that being said, I sort of balance it. I am full on with my kids in a sense of like cuddles and kisses
Yeah.
and hugs. And I will tell them constantly how much I love them, and, take little breaks to tickle them or to just do the stuff that parents want to do, right? Because
Yeah.
we like love those little kids so much. They're our life. So I kind of lean into the fun stuff that I want to do with them. But then usually I do have something that I need to get done just practically around the house. And at the same time, I'm like, this is a great time for them to just be bored and go do what they need to do. So I lean into those moments, but we're always still in the house together. We're
Mm-hmm.
always still doing it. And I think there's something beautiful about that, the same way that if you have a best friend and you don't constantly have to be talking in the car, you can just sit there quietly. There's something nice to that too. And I think that's important for moms to think about, because in today's day and age, moms feel so much guilt and they feel like they are neglecting their kids if they're not playing with them every second of the day. But I have really not met any neglectful moms. Personally, I've met so many moms and they're all just so in love with their kid. They're just trying to. So I think that free play or boredom is balance.
Yeah.
It's a nice balance to whatever you as a mom need, even if that's just sitting down sometimes and just saying like, "Mommy's going to look at this magazine. You guys go do what you got to do." That's
Mm-hmm.
okay, because it can't always be this constant teaching, entertaining, talking to your kids all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that was a long-winded way to say that I answer it by leaning into the fun stuff as a parent. I want to have fun with my kids. I crack jokes with them. We spend a lot of quality time together. We do almost everything together. So there's that. Then when it comes time for boredom, I know that it's probably a good time for me to either get some rest or do something else too. And that's also just as necessary. Like the house needs to be straightened up or
Absolutely.
mom needs to sit down. And then I know, like everything we talked about previously, this is also good for them because this is
Mm-hmm.
practice for when we travel, when we go to restaurants, when we sit in a car for a long time and there's nothing to do. This is good, healthy for them. And I also feel like this is very important because I learned this. This was very important for me to learn. And I think for other moms, it would be helpful, is that these moments where they are bored because you're not entertaining them also allows for you guys to come back with kind of a renewed, refresh perspective of each other. It gives them a break from mom. mom telling them what to do, mom telling them this, mom, like it gives them a
Mm-hmm.
break, and then it also gives mom a break from constantly having to be like giving, giving, giving. That boredom does it. And so that when it is time to come back and, everybody's kind of refreshed and happy to be together and you have more energy. And that I found really helpful in motherhood.
So, in saying that it's good for them to be bored, which I totally agree with, and it's good for you to get your stuff done, and it's just good all round. Just when you were saying that, like, I just thought of little ones, especially where impulse control is still a thing that is far from developed, right? So, how do you balance having a child be bored without having them getting to a point of being destructive? Like, I'm thinking of toddlers who are quiet for 3 seconds and you walk into the bathroom and then there's a chunk of hair cut off because they found a pair of scissors, or a cupboard in the kitchen was opened and there's flour now all over the floor, all over the child, do you know what I mean? So
Yes.
these things happen when a little one is bored because they don't have impulse control. How do we balance that? Like, would you suggest, like, I hate timeout. I don't believe in timeout. But when timeout became a big thing, it was like, oh, when they're 2 years old, they've got to be in the timeout corner for 2 minutes. Would you say that that kind of thing would be relevant? Like, it depends on the age, how long you can leave them by themselves before it gets to a point of destruction?
Yeah, I mean, I do a combination of things. I do a little bit of just baby proofing, child proofing. I really don't believe in doing too much. I really don't. I want to
Mm-hmm.
say that I don't think that you should pad your walls and get rid of your furniture. But there is a level of like when you have kids, that the scissors have to be like up here for a period of time. Like my son is 3 now. I don't have to hide anything. I don't have to hide scissors. He doesn't do that stuff anymore. But when he was 18 months, he was.
Yeah.
So, it's just kind of being aware. There's also a little bit of you have to be. So once you get rid of the dangerous stuff for those danger periods where if you want to have a little bit of freedom, you're like, okay, for now, we're going to move these knives just a little bit. Um, as a caveat, I think eventually they need to know how to deal with knives and not grab them. But when they're too
Yeah.
young, that's a safe way. And then there's a level I will say that you just have to like know that a little bit of that is going to happen. So there's some stuff like I walked in the other day and my kids had went through the pantry and taken out like I have like stocked paper towels and toilet paper and like Meyer soap and just like stocked stuff, and they took all of it out and built like this huge tower. And I laughed and I took a picture of it, because it was a good tower. It was really tall. They had like pulled up their little ladder for the kitchen to like even get higher up.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that level that I'm like, it was paper towels thing because all the stuff that they can reach is pretty much, I'm like, okay, you can use it.
You can
So
use it. Yeah.
that I'm like, I can't blame you. We were stuck inside the house because one of my other kids was sick that day. So I was like, I mean, that's a cool tower. So there's just a level of it that you have to be comfortable with. And then the third thing that I did do though from the destruction thing is I think as soon as they're getting into that age, that's a constant parenting thing for me where we're constantly saying like, oh no, we don't like, for example, some kids will want to come through and dump out every basket you have in the house or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll see a bunch of toys and it's not that they want to play with the toys. They just want to dump,
Just want to
dump,
dump.
dump.
Right.
So that kind of behavior for me personally is what I taught my kids not to do. Like, no, 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 we can play with the toys, pick the toy you want, take it out, but we don't want to dump it because then we all got to clean it up and it's going to take us a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So any time that I did see what I would consider destructive, not, you know, and there is a difference. Moms know a difference between if the child really just wants to play or if it's really kind of about just making a mess to make a
Just
mess.
making mess. Yeah.
Those I just started correcting immediately. Like just, oh no, 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 we don't want to do this because blah, 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 blah. Like, and just catching it in the butt before it can even and sometimes it still happens, but I feel
Mm-hmm.
like now my son, who's more of the destructive one than my daughter was pretty easy with that. She didn't do it. He really doesn't do it. He really doesn't do the destructive thing. And as a matter of fact, he'll even ask me now, like, can I dump this out? Is that okay? Like he'll ask me. And I appreciate that because I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
in this case, you can go ahead and dump it out. So I think, and that kind of thing, a parallel to that is also when you take kids out at the restaurant. It's just these little reminders, even when they're little, like 1 or 9 months or whatever. Even when they're little, it's like, oh no, no, we don't throw the knives on the floor, or no, no,
Mm-hmm.
no, no, we don't rip up that, we don't throw the paper towel. Somebody has to clean it up, so we don't want to make a mess. And I just find when you constantly do that, and it takes work as a parent, but when you constantly do that, when they do finally get older enough, they just don't do those things. Or if they do, it's very, very rare, So those are the three things that I would say.
Thank you so much. I think this has been such a good talk, and I think that there's so much to take in and digest. But before we end the call, can you tell listeners who want to reach you how they can reach you?
Absolutely. So I'm on Instagram and TikTok, both with the same handle. It's at Ciao Amber C. Ciao is like the Italian ciao, so CIAO, Amber C. You can connect with me on both of those, and my links and contact information are there as well.
Okay, perfect. I will link that in the description box as well. Amber, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And this was so much fun. I hope that it's helpful for moms out there.
It was helpful for me. I learned a lot, so I hope definitely it is for parents out there as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into the parenting. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any questions, feedback, or content suggestions, please email us at Taryn@theparenting.com. Please remember to subscribe, like, share, and give my aunt a 5-star rating.